Are you still walking around thinking Christopher Columbus was some kind of heroic genius who sailed the ocean blue to prove the Earth wasn't a pancake? Honestly, how did you make it this far in life with that coloring book version of history still rattling around in your head? Today, I'll explain why everything you learned about Christopher Columbus is wrong to you like you're 5 years old. And by the end of this, you'll finally understand why that guy gets less popular every year, and you'll be able to confidently explain to everyone why the whole story is basically one big historical typo. Now, let's start with the biggest, most obvious fib you were told in kindergarten. You know, the one they printed on posters with a smiling guy in a funny hat pointing at a beach. You know the one. Columbus discovered America. This is, without a doubt, the most ridiculous claim ever made. Saying Columbus discovered America is like walking into a stranger's house while a family is eating dinner and shouting, "I've discovered this kitchen!" It's not a discovery if people are already there. And let me tell you, people were already there. Millions of them. They had been there for thousands and thousands of years, living in complex societies, building cities, farming, and generally just minding their own business. They had names for their own land and for themselves. They did not need discovering, thank you very much. The people he first met, the Taíno, were living in the Caribbean islands. They had homes, families, and a whole way of life. When Columbus showed up, they were probably confused. I mean, who was this strange man with puffy pants getting off a giant wooden boat? He didn't plant a flag on an empty beach. He planted a flag in someone's front yard. He wasn't an explorer finding a new, untouched land. He was an uninvited guest who overstayed his welcome in the most dramatic way possible. He didn't even know where he was. I mean, he thought he had landed in the Indies, which is in Asia. And that's why he called the people he met Indians, which is maybe the longest lasting geographical mistake in history. He was lost. He bumped into a continent by accident, a continent that was already fully populated. So, let's repeat it together for the people in the back. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. He was just the first European to get really famous for being really lost. Okay, let's move on to the second giant fairy tale. Columbus was a brave scientist who set out to prove the Earth was round. This one is almost as silly as the first. The idea that everyone in the 1400s thought the Earth was flat is a complete myth. Educated people in Europe had known that the Earth was a sphere for nearly 2,000 years before Columbus even learned how to tie his shoes. The ancient Greeks had figured it out. I mean, they did the math, they looked at the stars, and they watched ships disappear over the horizon. It was settled science. It was like knowing that the sky is blue. No serious scholar or navigator was worried about sailing off the edge of the world. That was simply a bedtime story to scare children, not a genuine navigational concern. So, if they weren't arguing about the shape of the Earth, what was the actual argument about? Well, it was about its size. Columbus had a big idea, but it was based on some very bad math. He thought that the Earth was tiny, like comically small. He miscalculated its circumference by a massive amount, and when he went to the kings and queens of Europe to ask for money for his trip, they didn't laugh at him because they thought the world was flat. They consulted their own experts, their scientists and geographers, who all said the same thing. "Your Majesty, this man is a fool. The Earth is much bigger than he thinks. He and his crew will run out of food and water long before they reach Asia." They weren't worried that he'd fall off the edge. They were worried that he would starve in the middle of a gigantic ocean. And you know what? They were 100% correct. The only reason his trip didn't end as a complete failure with everyone perishing at sea was because a massive unmapped landmass just so happened to be in the way. He got incredibly lucky, and proving the Earth was round was never his mission. His mission was to find a fast new trade route to Asia to get his hands on spices and gold. He wasn't a scientist on a quest for knowledge. He was a businessman trying to find a shortcut. To put it simply, he didn't prove the Earth was round. He just proved that he was really bad at math but spectacularly lucky. It's like trying to walk to your corner store, getting lost, and accidentally ending up in a different country, then claiming you proved that walking is possible. Well, we already knew that. Now, we need to talk about the most uncomfortable part of the story. This is the part that gets completely scrubbed from children's books. We were taught that Columbus was a noble hero, a brave adventurer. But the reality is much darker. His motivations were not pure exploration. His primary goals were wealth and status. He had a contract with the Spanish king and queen that promised him a percentage of all the riches he found and the title of governor over any new lands. This was a business deal. Plain and simple. He was there to get rich. And when he arrived in the Americas and met the gentle and welcoming Taíno people, he didn't see them as fellow human beings. He saw them as a resource to be exploited. He wrote down in his own journal about how peaceful and generous they were. And in the very next breath, he wrote about how easily they could be subjected and forced to work for him. Just think about that. A host offers you a gift, and your first thought is how you can make them your personal servant. It's the mindset of a truly terrible person. His governorship of the island of Hispaniola was a catastrophe for the native population. He was obsessed with finding gold, and the problem was, there really wasn't much gold on the island. But that didn't stop him. He created a brutal tribute system. Every Taíno adult was ordered to bring him a certain amount of gold every few months, and this was simply an impossible task. If they failed to meet their quota, the punishment was severe and cruel. It was a system designed for failure, a system that caused immense suffering. And it gets worse. Columbus was a pioneer of the transatlantic trade in human beings. On his second voyage, he rounded up over 1,000 Taíno men, women, and children and crammed them onto his ships to be sent back to Spain and sold. Hundreds died on the journey, and this was just the beginning of a horrific chapter in world history, and he was the one who wrote the first page. His actions set a precedent. He showed other Europeans that the peoples of this new world could be treated not as people, but as objects for profit. Under his brutal rule, through forced labor, terrible treatment, and diseases that Europeans brought with them, the Taíno population was decimated. Within a few decades of his arrival, they were almost entirely wiped out. And this isn't the story of a hero. This is the story of a greedy and cruel man who brought devastation to a peaceful people. He wasn't a brave explorer. He was a ruthless invader and a terrible, terrible manager. Okay, let's go ahead and lighten things up with a couple of smaller but still important corrections to the story that you learned. For instance, the whole idea of him being Italian, was he? Well, sort of, but not really. He was from Genoa, which is a city in modern-day Italy, but back in the 15th century, there was no country called Italy. It was a collection of different city-states, kingdoms, and republics, and calling Columbus Italian is like calling a Roman from Caesar's time Italian. The concept simply didn't exist yet. It's a small detail, but it shows how we've changed the story over time to fit our modern understanding of the world. The image of Columbus as a great Italian hero was largely created in the late 19th century in the United States as a way to give Italian immigrants a figure to be proud of during a time of intense prejudice. It was simply a marketing campaign, not a historical fact. And what about his famous ship, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria? Well, we all memorized that in a little rhyme, didn't we? Well, that part of the story is also a little wobbly. Ship names back then were often more informal. The Santa Maria was the only real name of the three. The other two ships were almost certainly nicknamed by the sailors. La Niña was likely a nickname for a ship originally called the Santa Clara, and Niña means girl in Spanish, and La Pinta translates to the painted one, which might have been a reference to its appearance or possibly a slang term. So even the iconic names of his ships aren't quite the solid facts we were taught. It's another example of how the neat and tidy story we learned is just a simplified sketch of a much messier reality. The real story is always much more complicated, and frankly, more interesting than the fairy tale version. The story of Christopher Columbus that you learned in school is not history. It's a myth. It's a feel-good story created hundreds of years after he died to serve a specific purpose. It was designed to create a simple, clean origin story for America, one that painted European arrival as a heroic act of discovery and progress. It intentionally leaves out the inconvenient and horrifying parts. It ignores the millions of people who are already here, and it completely whitewashes the cruelty and greed that motivated the man himself. Knowing the real story doesn't mean we erase history. It means that we learn the actual history, not the cartoon version. It means we stop celebrating a man who was bad at geography, motivated by gold, and was responsible for immense human suffering. He didn't discover a new world, he simply began the process of destroying one. So, to recap, a guy who was terrible at math and thought that the world was the size of a grapefruit went looking for gold. He didn't prove the world was round because, well, everyone already knew that, and he accidentally bumped into a continent that was already full of people, and then he was incredibly cruel to those people in his quest to get rich. Honestly, he sounds less like a hero and more like the worst house guest of all time. You see, now you get it. You understand the real story behind the myth. You're not 5 anymore. You're practically a historian now, ready to see past the simple stories and understand the complicated truth. So go forth and gently correct your friends and family at the next get-together. You've earned it.